Hey guys, for this video, don't forget to set your phasers to like and subscribe. Pew 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 pew. Oh my god. Jesus Christ. Let's pretend that never happened and just jump right into today's video. Phasing is a really crucial aspect of competitive Pokemon that I feel has taken a huge hit in Sword and Shield. However, ever since Skarmory was reintroduced a few months ago in the DLC, who is a really prominent phaser, at least historically speaking, I've been meaning to make a video on the topic to explain to beginners, and more importantly, explain what makes it such a useful technique in Pokemon. At its most fundamental level, phasing is used to force your opponent to swap out to a random Pokemon. Moves like Dragon Tail and Circle Throw will hit your opponent and then force a random swap in Pokemon, but they can be blocked by things like Substitute or walled by certain typings. Roar and Whirlwind, when we talk about phasing moves, are really the most common and really what we have in mind, as they work no matter what, regardless of substitute, but they don't do that little bit of damage. All these moves, though, have something called negative priority, which means instead of going before your opponent does, like a quick attack or an ice shard or something like that, they have negative priority, so they go after your opponent does, regardless of how fast or slow your own Pokemon are. Beyond those moves, there's also a red card, which forces an opponent out upon attacking you. It's really such a niche move. It doesn't have the same defensive utility that I'm not going to get into that too much today. And you could also make the case that moves like Perish Song and Yawn are also phasing moves to an extent because they force a swap, but they don't really have much in common with what I'm going to be talking about here today, so I'll leave those alone as well. Now, why is phasing useful? Well, the primary use of phasing is to prevent an opponent from setting up. As with any regular swap, a Pokemon loses all of their setup boosts and all of their stat boosts when swapped out with a phasing move. And as far as a general insurance against an opponent sweeping you goes, phasers are really one of the best because once again, they typically ignore substitute, unlike status moves like Toxic and Thunder Wave. Now, this is already pretty great and can give your team a ton of defensive utility, but if you also have hazards on the field like Spikes, Toxic Spikes, and Stealth Rock, this also means that you can accumulate some chip damage on your opponent. So maybe not a ton of damage if you just have Stealth Rocks up, but if you have a full suit of Stealth Rocks and Spikes, and you've got a strong defensive Pokemon using the phasing move, you can very quickly gut your opponent with this combination. This is because the nature of the move means it's extremely difficult to swap around. What do I mean by this? Well, if I have an Alakazam against a Skarmory, and I can't really kill it with just one move, and I want to swap to my fire type to beat it, well, if I use Whirlwind, it's going to get swapped out again too, giving you more and more chip damage. This means you kind of just have to hope for a good matchup on the random switch. And if you have bad luck instead, and you get a bad matchup, then you're really in a hole, because then you have to make a difficult decision on whether they're going to attack you straight up because it's a positive matchup, or if they're going to Whirlwind again and renew this process all over again. And slight tangent, but phasing was really good in earlier metas that didn't have team preview, because in those metagames, knowing what your opponent had in the back and their hidden slots was so critical, and getting that valuable intel could be a huge piece of the game plan. And moves like Roar and Whirlwind that gave you that intel in addition to their other utility just give you one extra leg up when you're trying to determine what kind of team your opponent's running. Now, it is unfortunately at this point in the video where I have to ask Fun to leave the room. Fun, I'm sorry, you gotta get out of here. No, I'm sorry. No, get out of here. Okay, now that Fun's gone, we can talk about the scourge of competitive Pokemon and the darling of 2013 Pokemon Showdown sweep compilations, which is of course going to be Riolu. Back in Black and White, before this exploit was removed, Riolu could come in against you after hazards are set up and use Roar to gather chip damage. However, afterwards, it could use the move Copycat, which copies the last used move, which is of course going to be Roar because of that negative priority. But Rialu's special ability Prankster gives non-attacking moves extra priority on top of that. So that meant that much like a quick attack or an ice shard, it would use Roar with additional priority, not negative. All of this is a complex way to say that it would phase you in and out at the beginning of every turn before you had any chance to retaliate. And the only choice you had to beat it was if you got lucky and you had something on your team that had a good matchup against it, like a Bullet Punch or something like that. But if you didn't have a very specific type of Pokemon that could beat it, you just lose. And there's nothing you can do about it, and it was super lame, and it happens all the time on the ladder, and it's so cheesy. But that's gone now, so I can relax and talk about the current meta. Because in the current meta, as powerful as all this stuff I've just described is, the concept of phasing is honestly as low and really as little used as I've ever seen it. In earlier generations, again, as I said, the move was great because you could scout it out with your opponents, which isn't really a factor anymore in a team preview meta. And all the hazard chip that I talked about, which is really big, isn't as useful either because there's a lot of Magikarp Pokemon in the meta, tons of Regenerator, and of course the heavy duty boots meta. And finally, even the anti-sweeper aspect of it isn't the best in Sword and Shield either. Now that statement might make you scratch your head because there's lots of great setup sweepers right now. but it's actually the nature of how they match up versus the phasers that's the problem. So let's look at Hippowdon, for example, because it is historically one of the most prominent phasers in Pokemon, and it's always running a Roar or Whirlwind or something like that. And its access to those moves, in addition to its amazing bulk, meant that it could shut down a ton of setup sweepers. However, nowadays, even though it's more common than maybe ever, it mostly opts to run Toxic as its 4th move because it happens to have bad matchups against a lot of the overused sweepers, and you're not going to be in those situations where you're trying to force them out anyways. And you might question me and say, like, how bad could it be? Like, it's such an amazing tanky Pokemon. It must match up good against some setup sweepers, and it's true. But if you actually run down the list right now, there's a lot of special setup sweepers, which just kind of nuke it because its special defense isn't fantastic. And in terms of the physical attackers, a lot of them just have really good matchups against it, like Kyurem and Urshifu Rapid Strike. So yeah, generally speaking, if I want insurance against a sweep, I'm probably not going to be running a phaser like this. I'm probably going to be running like a Haze Toxapex, or an Unaware Clefable, or even a Ditto. However, don't let that disclaimer sort of scare you off the topic, because I still think there's a lot of room for phasing in the current meta. Of those options I just mentioned, not a lot beat Substitute. In almost every major meta, phasing is a huge aspect of play and worth an understanding, because if we're talking about a playstyle like Stall, I think it's almost always going to have some sort of role, at least in that sort of playstyle. So maybe give it a shot on your team if you want to check out its amazing utility firsthand. But that is all I have to talk about today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did and you somehow missed my hilarious / very, very cringeworthy opening to the video, I would ask that you like and subscribe. But otherwise, pew pew. I'll see you next time.